Okay, welcome here again, everyone. Good to see you all again. So today is day 2, and the focus in this one is on how do I make myself do it. Last time we talked a lot about some of the things that we can do to make the most of this, very beautiful connection between the mind and the body that we're still learning a lot about. And today we're going to talk about how to enact those things into a process of change to form good habits, sustain good routines, that kind of thing. I got some of that stuff behind me as well. And then some people were curious about talking about self-talk today and talking about the brain. So we'll do both of those. In fact, I thought we'd start with talking about the brain. So these top words here, can everyone read this and everyone can hear me okay, basically? I'll assume yes until I hear otherwise. If anyone has any trouble, let me know in the chat. But these top 3 points in red, these are 3 things I think I'd like to start out explaining just about the nature of the brain. These are, it just kind of helps us build this into the stuff we're going to talk about, how to form a habit. Because of these concepts about the brain and how it generally works, that's why we're going to do habits the way we're going to do them, and that's why we run into the pitfalls that we're going to run into. So the first thing up here is that it says not elegant, which might seem like a funny way to describe the brain, and it is, because I'm not really describing the brain. I'm actually describing the way the brain solves problems. And the brain is really the human body is actually quite consistent about the way that it solves problems. If you are, not using your leg because it's broken, your body stops sustaining that, which is actually not very elegant if you think about it. It'd be much more, productive of your body to keep that just perfectly ready and healthy and strong for when you are going to need it again, inevitably. But it doesn't do that. So and the brain is similar. I learned about this from a client of mine. They work out with me here at the studio. They're a very bright neurologist, and they shared this story with me. I just love it because it really captures a lot about how the brain works. So they're explaining to me the way they treat this issue that they run into with the eyes. Okay, so it's not uncommon for neurologists to work with people who've been in car accidents, and it's not uncommon for people who've been in car accidents to kind of smack one side of their face, right? And then that can end up damaging very fine muscles around the eyes. Those muscles are involved in tracking these fine motor movements of the human eye. And that's a problem when those muscles get damaged, because then one eye is tracking just fine and the other eye kind of can lag behind, or it can not follow certain movements if the muscle's too damaged. And so you can imagine that ends up, some people, we get dizzy, we fall over, or we can't complete a task, and it's, there's a lot of nausea. So the brain usually deals with this pretty quickly. People don't experience these symptoms for very long because the brain cuts off information from that optic nerve. So the eye is still working. The brain just doesn't want to use it anymore because it's causing this problem. And the brain considers that problem solved, right? I mean, okay, you're no longer seeing double. You can do most things. You have this massive blind spot now, but for all intents and purposes, you're back to working just fine. This is actually not that different from how the body solves problems with, anxiety or depression or these sorts of things. But obviously the long-term implications of this solution are not very healthy. They're not really what we would want for anybody or for ourselves. And so there's this way that they treat this. It's a very simple way of working with the brain. If your right eye has been damaged, they will actually patch your strong eye. They'll patch your left eye. And they do that to take away the brain's option of relying solely on your healthy eye. And then it forces your brain to, recover and continue to provide blood flow to those areas around, or to those small muscles around your eye, and then it heals properly, and then you can unpatch it. So that's just an example. That is not an elegant solution to the problem of damaged muscles around the eye. And we have to, when we're trying to form habits and we're trying to form routines that are in our best interest for health behaviors, we need to work with the brain. Because if it's got the power to cut off our vision, or make limbs go limp, even though they're healthy and fine, that's something that's well documented in medical research, then we have to work with this thing. It's very powerful, and we have to learn how it likes to do things and sort of try to work within its boundaries. The other thing about the brain, very similar to other parts of the body, regions of the brain are use dependent. I may have even mentioned that last time. So that is to say, people who are, say, if they're quite depressed, they often will find, if someone's been depressed for several years, that their hippocampus in their brain is smaller. And it's physically measured smaller. And that's because that's part of the default mode network. Doesn't really need to get too into it, but it's a mode, it's a whole bunch of regions of the brain that are active when we're thinking about ourselves, when we're empathizing. This would be a network in my brain I use quite a bit for in therapy, to be empathic and connect with people and communicate while we're doing that. And if that region of the brain is smaller, you're not going to think about yourself relative to your environment as accurately. And it's a common, it's one of the most damaging side effects of depression, actually, I would say, is that you can't really assess yourself relative to your environment very well. You're just going to have that strong pessimism that we see come up with depression. No one likes me, kind of like you often talk about Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh as a depressed character because he was just so pessimistic. And this is part of what's going on there. I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, but I'm just breaking it into pieces. And if you have your amygdala, if you're often very anxious or fearful or tense, if that region of your brain is always active and working, then it's going to be physically larger. And it's going to overpower other parts of your brain that would normally help you regulate your amygdala or help yourself calm down, or avoid a panic attack or something like that. So the brain's regions are use dependent, and we're going to build that into a lot of these habits that we're going to try to talk about the way to develop it, to get yourself to do it. And the last one is that it's slow to change. So that is true in adulthood. In childhood, your brain is forming many millions of neural pathways, day to day. It's you're learning things, everything is new, and the brain is absorbing information rapidly. But again, you have to remember, it's absorbing that information, but it's not very elegant. So sometimes we end up with beliefs about ourselves or the world or, other people that are not necessarily accurate to reality. We can think of, and that's going to shape in a lot of ways the way that we approach habit formations, routines, and taking care of ourselves as adults, experiences we have in childhood. And when we're adults, we're going to have to learn to have some patience with the way that the brain changes once it's developed. So, one way that you can think of that is even in terms of if you've ever known anyone, or if you've been unfortunate enough to ever have a brain injury, something that a lot of my clients who dealt with that are told repeatedly by their doctors, whether it's a family doctor or their neurologist, is that the brain heals slowly. A bad whack to the head that leaves you with headaches, you could be experiencing those headaches for months because the brain takes so long to repair, and you have to monitor your activity level and your blood pressure. And it's a very slow healing and slow changing organ, especially in adulthood. I don't actually know if it heals slower for children as well. I just know that it's forming so quickly that they can pick up new things and much faster than adults. So those are 3 things to bear in mind. I'm going to probably refer to them a few times, and probably valuable to think of your brain and your approach to problem solving and relationships with yourself and your body as sort of like a lunch kit that your parents packed you. And you don't get a choice necessarily what's in there. And it's not that your parents meant to pack you anything that's bad for you, but sometimes we have to make certain exchanges, right? So trying to trade out those habits that were given to us by our environment as we grew up, and can take a lot of time. So I'm going to refer a lot to a book as we start talking about habits. And I'm just going to let you know it's a great book for forming healthy habits. If anyone wants to check it out afterwards, it is called Atomic Habits, and it's by an author named James Clear. So I highly recommend that book. I think that it's very helpful to a lot of people. It's a huge part of how I coach people, whether it's in a studio or in a therapy office. So we're going to break down what a habit is. Habits, there's actually not a big difference between a good habit and a bad habit. Structurally speaking, they're basically the same. So each habit that we have has a cue or a trigger. One thing I'll point out that some people put in here above the cue or the trigger is a craving. So that we've all experienced that. And there's some disagreement about whether cravings always precede a cue or a trigger, whether a cue or a trigger is actually what creates the craving. It's very complicated. There's some types of cravings that are more powerful than others. Smoking is known as a very powerful craving. The title of the book. Yes, I will do that. I actually have it noted at the end, but I will put it here now. So the Atomic Habits. I'm just writing in orange here the name of that book. And as far as I know, he spells it like that. Sometimes authors like to be clever. I'll mention other books too. There's a few other ones. I'll write them down as we go. But everyone can still see this and everything fine. Oh, in the chat. That shows how elegant I am with technology. Okay, also not elegant, just like the brain. So a cue or a trigger, whether it's before or after craving, we don't fully have that worked out yet, but you can think of them as very similar. That cue or trigger tends to lead us into a behavior. So again, we'll just take two habits. So we'll take smoking, and I've often heard from people who've quit smoking for decades, even, that sometimes they'll notice they'll get off of a lawnmower on a sunny day, and all of a sudden they're craving a smoke. They haven't smoked for like 20 years maybe, right? But the craving comes up. So that's one habit we'll take as an example. The behavior is obviously smoking. Another habit could be, brushing your teeth in the morning. There's lots of people who brushing their teeth in the morning feels so important to them that it's virtually impossible for them to leave the door without doing it, right? And they might wake up and have the sip of water and think, oh, my breath is gross. And so then that's your cue for the behavior of cleaning your teeth, which is good behavior. The cue is unfortunate, but sometimes we have gross breath in the morning. It's just part of having a body. And then there's some kind of reward. So the reward with the smoking, while nicotine and other compounds in cigarettes, tobacco, it gives you a bit of a buzz. It's often makes people more comfortable in social situations. I think I talked a little bit about how there's often a bit of a dopaminergic release in the brain if people started smoking at an early age, because it probably helped them be accepted by their peers. So then that's wired in. You get a little bit of a dopamine bump every single time then that you that you smoke a cigarette. So that is also part of the reward. And the reward for the teeth brushing is just that it's fresh and minty, and then you're more confident. So I'll talk about first the ways that I see most people fail to develop a good habit. One of them, let's take working out, for example. One of them is that they pick cues or triggers that are negative in nature, right? So an example of that might be most of the times that you are reminded that you'd like to be working out more might be when you see yourself in the mirror and you're unhappy with your appearance. It's not that motivating of a cue or a trigger. That's not something that is likely to lead to you sustaining that habit. It might get you to the gym that day, but you're doing that out of a sense of obligation. So the behavior is going to feel like punishment, and the reward is just gonna, well, it depends. I have had people have those experiences and actually feel good after a workout, but a lot of the time working out in and of itself does not become something they look forward to. And so they pick triggers that are unfortunate or negative or infrequent. James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits the importance of choosing obvious triggers. So something you cannot miss. He talks a lot about putting things up in your environment that are going to remind you or cue you to engage in a certain habit. And they should be attractive, right? That's his other point. The cues or triggers that lead us to strong health behaviors, as much as possible, they should be something that appeals to us. So it can be hard to find that with something like working out, because it's a controlled discomfort, right? Or eating healthy, because eating healthy generally means you're eating less fat, less sugar. Those are when fat and sugar are combined, we generally associate that with like a really tasty, addictive food. And then the reasons for that are also neurological. Your brain, again, being not elegant, thinks that having a lot of fat and sugar is great because you get to store that energy, and who knows when you're going to need that, according to your brain. We kind of know there's, for the most part, quite a bit of food around most of us most of the time. If we're unfortunate enough to be in that other situation, the brain has all kinds of other problems. But, that's something people run into a lot with the cues and triggers. Similarly, with behavior, people choose behaviors as a part of their habits that are somewhat unrealistic. If their goal is to go to the gym, they would like to see themselves have the behavior of going to the gym 5 times a week, but they only go twice. Well, that's much more than nothing. And a lot of people would be perfectly healthy if they worked out at the gym twice a week and got in a little bit of cardio. If you remember from last week, we talked about 150 minutes of aerobic activity. If you do a 60-minute workout and your heart rate is, noticeably elevated throughout most of that, say 50 minutes, you're already 2/3 of the way to what you need to do to be in that, recommended healthy level of activity from physicians. But people, if we choose too big a behavior, too difficult a behavior to execute, then we end up feeling like failures, even though, in many ways it's quite successful. And the reward one is tricky because it is hard, like I said, to reward things that are somewhat uncomfortable in nature. Sometimes the one thing I've seen people do well with is even just little tiny rewards. Like I had a client who really struggled with adhering to, I can't remember, it wasn't the workouts, it was, they had the workouts with me, so that was taken care of. Oh yeah, but it was like some cardio, and they only saw me once a week. So they wanted to try to get in 2 other workouts. And I think that worked for their goals, but they would often struggle with that. So what they started to do, and it worked for them, it sounds simple, but they really like stickers. They did. So they would go on, websites like Etsy that sell these more unique stickers. And every day that they successfully did a workout, they would, as soon as they were done, put that sticker on their little day planner that they had. And they were really pumped about it. Like it made them feel happy. And when they looked at their whole week and they flipped through pages of weeks and weeks, they saw those stickers adding up. Oh, one person is waiting. So that's just an example of a really simple reward that actually works fairly well. Similarly, people putting X's on calendars. Now, the trick is with rewards, though, is you want it to be as close as you can get it to the behavior. So if you're putting a sticker in your book, don't wait till you drive home from the gym or something. Bring your book, bring your sticker, do it right away. Same with the X's. If that's something you want to put in your calendar, put it right in there. Other rewards that people tend to find more motivating is they set a number of workouts before they'll buy it, some gym clothing that they really like, but they kind of like to earn it. They don't, they don't mind working out in t-shirts or shorts or whatever, but if they want that kind of cool, more athletic fiber shirt that they saw at the store, they tell themselves they're going to wait until they have done, say 20 workouts, which takes some discipline, right? Which we'll talk about too. But that's another really simple way to get a quick reward. And then again, I would say, try to have that reward as soon as you finish that workout, like go right to the store or click purchase on your phone, whatever it is. There's a lot of, the immediacy of rewards, which we'll talk about is becoming a bit of a problem with technology and social media, has a lot to do with how, much your brain locks that in and associates it with a behavior it should repeat. Okay, so that's how we want to take advantage of some of those. The unfortunate thing is that things that are not healthy for us can be so rewarding. So we have to find, again, ways to work with the brain. And we have to respect the fact that it's just, it's going to change the way it approaches change in general. So routines are a little different. And I want to kind of move on to talking about routines, I think. But does anyone have any questions about this? We're going to kind of come back around a little bit to habits, but if anyone has any questions, you can post them in the chat, or any, examples of something. Like one of the harder things I find to brainstorm is actually the reward, to be honest. But usually that's something I do collaboratively with my clients, which is nice. My clients are quite clever. They can solve most of their own problems if we can both manage to stay out of their way. But okay, I'll move on to routines. And the routines are different. A routine and a habit. A habit is this loop. And a routine is basically what this looks like on a calendar, right? It's something that's regular, something you anticipate, maybe you look forward to, and that sort of thing. And these are the things that can prevent small habits from becoming something that we can get into a routine. And so I think I'll tilt this down a bit. Yeah, okay, you can see it, right? Everyone can see these words here. There's a few of them. So is there a glare there? Maybe slightly. There we go. I'll try from this side. So the first thing, this is going to be almost every time, almost all of these top ones here are actually a version of this first one. So we call it all or nothing thinking. And this is something that is a huge part of addictions work. I was really surprised when I became a therapist how much of the addictions material was familiar to me because of my work with people in personal training. Because we so often get into this all or nothing thinking. I've already given some examples of that. Your goal is 5 workouts, but you only do 3. So you're disappointed in yourself, even though 3 is great, Similarly, people with, eating food, they might try to eat, basically, there's a famous quote from, he's called the Godfather of Fitness, Jack LaLanne. And I love the guy, but I totally disagree with him on this. He said about nutrition, if it tastes good, spit it out. That was something he was really known for. Don't do that. In my opinion, this is a modern, updated opinion on that. I don't think that that's a good idea. Again, you have to work with your brain, and your brain really quite likes food. And quite honestly, it's one of the, I think, most wonderful things about living on Earth for as long as we do, is that we get to eat stuff that's really diverse and delicious. So, but those are the types of things that people can use to you can see how they're setting up those unsustainable levels of adherence for themselves. They're cheating themselves out of progress just because of this kind of, again, all or nothing thinking. That comes up a lot. Similar, again, is timelines. The human body only changes so fast. It's not uncommon that I will get messages on my fitness studio's social media of people asking me to help them cut weight or water weight in particular. They'll mention for a trip or something, right? Like they have a trip coming. I was like, okay, well, when is your trip? And it's like in 3 weeks. And I don't work with people like that. I actually discourage them from working with a trainer, because I tell them it's not actually a good use of your money. A trainer should be someone who wants to work themselves out of a job, but over a longer period of time than 3 weeks, to help you form these habits, because the brain is slow to change, right? And the human body as well. So we get these timelines in our heads, and then we see everything else that isn't in the timeline that we've decided we should have, that we got told by, someone selling us something, as failure. And it's not. If you wanted to lose whatever, I keep going back to weight loss, but it can be anything. If you wanted to become stronger, if you wanted to do 10 pull-ups and you wanted to be able to do it in 2 months, well, if you're starting at a place of doing 3 pull-ups, I would discourage you from choosing that goal, because pull-ups are really, really hard. It's actually not the easiest thing to do with the human body, especially, for females, but it is doable. It just takes time. And if you go through those 3 months, and you can only do 7 pull-ups, you might feel badly about yourself if you're kind of locked into that all or nothing fixed timeline, right? So very much the same thing. We have to have timelines that are realistic. Maybe we should talk to our doctor about how long it should take us to achieve this or that, and also just realistically, this is something that people tend not to notice for some reason, but any sort of significant story of accomplishment, like whether it's earning a degree or losing a life-saving amount of body fat, for example, once people have achieved it, they don't necessarily tend to care very much how long it took them. Very rarely. It can happen. I've definitely talked to people who have some resentment for how long some goals take, but the vast majority of the time, once you've achieved the goal that you want, it doesn't matter if it took you 5 years or 5 months. You're just so happy to have achieved that. And you should be, right? You know, you worked very hard for it. This is something that our society is stitching, and this says magic pill here. So people, I can't tell you how many times I've overheard a conversation, you know, at a supplement shop about someone coming in saying, I want to gain some muscle or I want to lose some fat. And people just start talking about products right away, instead of talking about, you know, habits, or instead of talking about, you know, asking more questions, you know, about like, well, are you at a healthy body weight or not? Like, you know, maybe you don't need to be focused on that goal. Maybe you've gotten that idea from somewhere that is unhelpful, right? But we very quickly are looking for something that we can take or do that's simple and quick. And I will go through today, we're going to talk about, I call them the nearly nothing interventions, some things that you can do that we know benefit your brain and your body that require you to do almost nothing. But they also take time, and you need to do them. It's use dependent. So it's not a pill, it's not a quick fix. And the last one, yeah, I'm going to skip unsustainable because that's sort of similar to what I said about some other things. But I am going to mention the abstinence violation principle. It's a fancy word or phrase, but it's simple in that what it means is, we've all kind of done this. I do this too, but this is the person who say, you know, they have a certain calorie goal for the day. I'm using this as an example again because I see it all the time. I've seen it, like all of my clients, I see this probably multiple times in the gym, where they have a certain goal to eat X amount of calories. And that means that they're going to have to really be careful about like sweets people bring into work, for example. So if they go to work and, you know, they're just going about their day, they're absent-minded, and out of a habit, they see that they get cued by seeing a donut on the table in a box. They grab it, they eat it. That's the behavior. They enjoy it. That's the reward. Then at some point, they might get horrified, realizing that they had kind of decided to not do this. And this donut, you know, it's just the very beginning of the day. They're trying to stay under a certain number. And now this donut has pushed them much closer to that number than they were supposed to be by 9 in the morning, right? And so, like, realistically, not a big deal, right? You could just continue to eat exactly as you had planned to eat, which would be healthy and good for you. And the donut will slow your progress down a little bit, but it's okay, because if you have a realistic timeline, honestly, it doesn't matter. It's really just not that important. But that is very rarely how people react to those situations. I think most of you are probably thinking of the more typical reaction that I see in myself or in my clients, which is, great, I blew it, I wasted all of this, you know, all of my calories on this, forget about it. I'm just going to eat whatever I want for the rest of the day. So then, you know, then they start maybe getting the frappuccinos that they've been trying to avoid, or they get a pizza on the way home. And before you know it, it just becomes this, you know, colossal, you know, straying from their goals that really wasn't necessary. The donut was not a huge deal. It really was almost harmless, if not completely harmless. But now it just becomes this cycle. And that's not something that generally leads to sustainable change or even to healthy thinking. Like, that's not a great relationship to have with food. Food shouldn't be something that you like imprison yourself within a certain number and live by that every day and get upset and binge eat when you know, make one small infraction to your plan. It's just really not that important. So that is worth talking about, because we only do this with certain things. Like, if you drop your iPhone, you don't stomp on it until it's broken, right? Like, we quickly pick it up, check if it's okay, and remind ourselves to buy a new case, right? Like, that we take care of it because it's valuable. And that's what we should do with ourselves and our health and our nutrition and our exercise. It's, you know what I mean? So people very often allow themselves little exceptions to the way that they treat themselves or their bodies or their mind, right? But we should not do that. We shouldn't make those exceptions. We should treat ourselves like someone we value or something we value even, right? And work towards that. The last one is instant gratification, which you can see, as we've talked about, how the brain is not elegant and it's really addicted to rewards, that instant gratification is not a great thing to be dealing with. And I mean, if you wanted to see a documentary, this one I will put in the chat. This one's really quite widely known about. It is called The Social Dilemma. It takes a bit of a, I don't know how to spell dilemma. It's embarrassing. Well, Google does. It takes a bit of a political direction. It's talking a lot about how people are becoming more divided against one another. And I think that that's true. I think that it's worth watching. I hope it's not as bad as they say it is in the documentary. It rarely is, but I mean, that's documentaries for you. But what is neat about that is they do a good job in that documentary. It's on Netflix, by the way, of explaining the way that technology is changing how we think. And the reason that it's doing that is because the brain isn't elegant and because it's addicted to rewards. So to put this into perspective, it's hard to understate how much damage it can do to a person's ability to solve problems or achieve long-term goals, or to achieve success in long-term goals, if they are unable to delay gratification, which is getting to be more and more of a rare skill. I'm going to talk about, this is probably one of the most famous psychology experiments of all time. It was very brilliant and simple, but long-term. So they took kids of a young age. I don't remember. I think I want to say 5 or 6 year olds. They were quite young. And they put them in a room with an interviewer, and the interviewer gave them a marshmallow. And then he said to them, this marshmallow is yours. You can have it whenever you want. But, and it's fun, it's so cute. If you watch the video, they're all reaching for it right away. He said, but if you wait until I get back, and I don't remember, he left for like 10 minutes. It wasn't super long, but for a kid, that's an eternity. If you wait until I get back and there's still a marshmallow here, you will get 2 marshmallows. And that was the experiment. And some kids could wait. Some kids didn't even wait till they left the room and they ate it. But some were able to wait. It's an adorable experiment. You should YouTube it because they're just like wriggling, just wanting to eat this thing. And then what they found in the decades that followed, with a high level of consistency, the kids who were able to delay eating that marshmallow were much more successful in life. They had better mental health, better overall health, and also just, successful by the metrics that we assign as a society, such as income and, financial stability, which, I mean, there's no reason not to want that. So that's something that I'm going to return to that later, because they did a follow-up to the marshmallow experiment, which is really also fascinating, but for some reason less known about. But I think it's actually probably the biggest deal ever. So we'll talk about that later. One thing that I want to kind of pass along, because we're about to switch into talking about the nearly nothing interventions, is and this is something from Atomic Habits. The smaller your behavior, the better. And in the book Atomic Habits, he actually advocates, and there's a physician also I know about who I mentioned last time, Rangan Chatterjee, who advocates for this as well. It's called the 2-minute rule. So the 2-minute rule is you try to get yourself to do the behavior, but only for 2 minutes. And it's really fighting back against the all or nothing thinking that we so often get locked into. So I've had clients who I tell them, and this has been successful, and usually they just start doing it more, like sooner, but I mean, it doesn't matter. I've told them, like, don't even worry about going into the gym. Just drive past it on the way home. Just take that route home. Or if it's already on your route home, just drive through the parking lot and just do that for a week, 2 or 3 times a week, or once a week, whatever. And that is actually, it sounds almost silly, but what's important to notice is that working out is composed of many behaviors. And one of those behaviors is actually showing up. One of those behaviors is actually driving into the parking lot. One of those behaviors is actually walking through the gym door. If you just slowly build those up and continue to build them into your day, into your routine, you're honoring and working with the slow to change brain. And there's actually good data on this and a fairly high level of success. And I've had good experiences with clients who do this. And again, often what people do is they'll start doing that and then they'll just kind of say, well, screw it, I'll just do a workout, which is also fine. But you're only required to do that. You're successful if you just show up or drive through the parking lot or lift a weight, right? There's even people who go in and do one exercise or whatever. And the 2-minute rule that's basically a version of it. Another thing would be, meditation. We're about to talk about meditation. That is a very reliably helpful habit to form for your mental health and your physical health. And the numbers don't lie. The best way to do meditation is 15 to 20 minutes a day, once or twice a day for 8 weeks. That's the facts, right? Like that's what all the research says. But that doesn't mean it's pointless if you don't do exactly that, right? That's, again, we're falling that all or nothing thinking. So even if you were to sit there and meditate, just focus on your breathing. And if you think about something, don't worry about it. Just focus on your breathing again. And it doesn't matter how many times that happens. And you do that for 2 minutes and then get on with your day. That's good. That's the 2-minute rule. That you're forming that behavior. Part of the behavior is making yourself start. So that's good, right? And so we're just breaking it down, these little pieces. And it's very effective. So we're going to talk a little bit from there. If anyone has any questions about the 2-minute rule or any of these things, let me know. We're going to kind of move on from what's on the board. And I'm going to talk very quickly about serotonin. There's a few, we talked about that last time. It's a neurotransmitter. The more abundant it is in your brain and the more efficient your brain is at processing it, then generally you will be better, you'll have better mental health and better relationship with yourself, self-confidence, self-esteem. And there's a few ways that we know about to increase serotonin by doing almost nothing. Okay, so yeah, with the meditation, I'll return to the meditation in a minute to answer the question about is that 2 10-minute ones. I believe it could be. I actually, to be honest with you, I don't entirely know, but I'll revisit some of the data in a second. So here's some things you can do, just real quick. This is from a peer-reviewed journal by a I like this psychiatrist a lot. The name is Simon Young. And they were, the paper is titled, Ways to Improve Brain Serotonin Without Drugs, which should be the most read paper in psychiatry, but it isn't, because most of the papers in psychiatry are paid for by pharmaceutical companies. So these are things that you're not going to hear about as often because they don't have the same capital attracted to them. But these are very efficient, proven ways to improve your serotonin. I'm just going to go over them kind of quick because they're very simple. If you've ever heard of a happy light or a mood light, those are very effective. If you were to get one, it has to be more than 10,000 lumens. When you use it, you should use it as soon as you wake up for about 20 to 30 minutes. It should be about 2 to 3 feet away from your face. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to stare at it. It just has to be at like maybe your 10 o'clock or your 2 o'clock and just glance at it occasionally. So, and that's all you have to do. So that's almost nothing. You can most of us wake up, and people in my generation and around it go, and we're on our phones for a while. Or, like this could be a harder habit if you have to start waking up earlier, but even if you get in front of this light again for 2 minutes, good. Okay, great. You mastered the art of showing up that day. Just try to add to it in the future. But that's it. That's the whole thing with happy lights or mood lights, and they're shown to change the way that people's serotonin works and to create shifts in mood. Another one is there's some supplements that are worth mentioning. Vitamin D, that and the mood light are quite cooperative. And also in Canada, this is a big deal because we have less daylight to work with, and it's really cold during the darkest part of the year. So even if we do get outside, we're covered up. We barely have any skin exposed to absorb, vitamin D from the sun, which is our primary source. And most of us don't eat very much fatty fish, which is another place we get vitamin D from. So supplementing vitamin D and the happy light or the mood light is a very good idea. And it's almost doing nothing. It's taking a little capsule every day, right? Also omega-3 fatty acids. That one's a little bit looser, but there's other benefits to that for cardiac health and stuff. Again, these are supplements, right? So you can talk to your doctor, ask your family physicians about it before you commit to anything long-term. It's totally fine. And when I'm talking about supplements, I did want to mention one thing. I hope this doesn't disappoint anybody, But anybody out there who's taking tryptophan supplements, they're probably not working. This is a supplement that I kind of resent the companies that try to sell it, because tryptophan is an amino acid, which means it's one of the very small building blocks of protein. And when we ingest tryptophan, it has to compete to get in through the blood-brain barrier with all of these other amino acids. And it's not that competitive, quite frankly. It's not very good at getting through the blood-brain barrier. Other amino acids are much better at it, or it's just more natural for them. So supplementing it doesn't really do anything. What needs to happen is tryptophan needs to be more in the food. And there's actually lots of lobbying going on, again, from people who don't have a lot of money, because tryptophan is very cheap, who want to get corn to be genetically modified so that anything that we eat that's corn-based in North America, for example, would have more tryptophan in it. And that would be easier if it's in the food, because then it makes it into our brain. But we're not there yet. So I would just discourage people from spending their money on tryptophan, and you could spend your money on vitamin D and omega-3. And now we are going to talk about meditation. So the question was about the 20-minute, if you're going to meditate for 20 minutes a day, does that mean you can do 2 10-minute ones? I believe so. I believe what I had said, and this is what the research says, I'm pretty sure, is 15 to 20 minutes a day, once or twice a day. So it's one of those things. Like, 40 minutes, 20 minutes is a lot less than 40, but it's also a lot more than 2. So again, I would encourage anyone who's trying to determine how much they meditate to just start with what you can fit. And if you can do more, do more. It seems like once you've meditated it's really hard to say what the ceiling on the benefits of meditation are, because when we measure the brains of people who've meditated for 10,000 hours or more, which is basically only monks, their brains are very physically different than ours. So there is probably a benefit to meditating for 2 hours a day if you wanted to, but I wouldn't worry about it if you're unable to find the time to do that. 20 minutes a day, once or twice, is probably plenty. Meditation. So again, it is associated with those numbers. You got to do it for 8 weeks. You got to do it about that much a day. But it is so amazing what we can see done through meditation. So there's a show, and it's free on YouTube. I mentioned it last time, I think. It's called Doctor in the House. And there's a doctor, I mentioned him, his name is Rangan Chatterjee, and he would go and live with people in their home for a month who had like a treatment-resistant health issue. And one thing he did was he had people spit into a vial 3 times a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once in the evening. And then he would test their spit for cortisol. That's stress hormone, right? Too much of it is bad. A little bit of it can be very helpful. And he would find the time of day when their cortisol was the highest. It was often the morning. I think if you want to look into his work with this, if you typed in on YouTube, Doctor in the House, Prita, Prita, I believe that was his patient. Her cortisol in the morning was very high. And he had her just start meditating for, I think it was 10 to 15 minutes in the morning. And then he retested her cortisol levels after 30 days, and they were already substantially lower. So this, I know that, like, if there was a drug that could do that, I can't tell you how excited pharmaceutical companies would be. It's a very impressive amount of change to achieve in the human body and in the brain by sitting still and breathing for 15 minutes. It's I can't recommend it enough. It's also, actually, this is maybe bad for business for me as a therapist, but the changes that we see in people's brains as a result of talk therapy and meditation are not different. They're the same change, and therapy is much more expensive than $0, right? Like meditation is super accessible and super affordable. And so, I just would encourage everyone to try that, to try to develop the habit of meditation. I hate to be that guy. I mean, I know everyone's talking about it till they're blue in the face, but the fact is, I think it's the closest thing to a silver bullet we've ever had in mental health. So in terms of what's happening in the brain, I might skip some of this. I have a lot of details here about what's happening in the brain, but I don't think that many of them are super important. Yeah, and what we'll do instead is we'll talk about a couple of interventions that have been studied that show, again, they're not doing very much, almost nothing, but they are ways of developing more empathy for yourself or compassion for yourself. So there's two of them. One of them that comes to mind, this is from a psychologist. Her name is Kristin Neff. Anyone who's familiar with her, she's a specialist on self-compassion, and she, also piggybacks meditation onto that because they're very cooperative. But she often recommends people, if you're in the middle of what you might call a shame spiral, your self-talk is getting out of control, developing a sense of awareness for that is very important. That's one thing talk therapy can be helpful for you. A therapist will be more trained to catch some of those things as they're happening that we can easily miss because it's our own mind. If you, in that moment, you stop and you record a video of yourself talking to yourself as if you were someone you cared about, and then you can then watch that video or record another one in subsequent experiences where you're being hard on yourself. This was a method that was used by, I mentioned him last time, Dr. Peter Attia. He's a specialist in longevity who has a keen interest in mental health because what's the point of living a long time if you're just going to suffer? So he talked about how he would do this for himself because he described himself as an Olympic level self-critic. And that's how he said he got through med school, but it has depreciating returns because now, he's a parent and stuff, and he has to find other ways to solve problems that are more elegant. But he would record these videos of himself. For him, it was like he was very dedicated to archery at the time. It was a skill that he wanted to develop, and he could just be so hard on himself if he just had an off day, And so he said, I think he was actually doing an interview with his therapist. His therapist's name was Terry Real, and they were talking on his podcast. And he said, I would record myself saying, like, look, I know how important archery is to you. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay that you're disappointed, but you have to remember that you're a very good person. You care a lot about your patients. You're a good dad. You want the best for your kids. And that's what you're going to go home to focus on now. And you're going to get another chance to come back here and do this archery stuff tomorrow. And you're probably going to be better. It's very rare that this is 2 days in a row. You're just having an off day. And then he'd send that video to his therapist and they would talk about it and develop his ability to coach himself with more and more compassion. Over time, he found that made a huge difference. And this is something that Kristin Neff, was on her studies on developing compassion in people. This is one thing that tends to result in that. But it goes on in the brain when people are compassionate, starts happening more when we are talking to ourselves over the camera. It's really neat. So I encourage everyone to try it. I've tried it. It was successful as well. When I was dealing with panic attack disorder, I found it very helpful. And another one that is a little easier, this is again, another almost nothing intervention, is remember what I said at the beginning, right? About putting, about the lunch kit that is packed for you in your childhood based on your environment or, the way you experience your parents, even if your parents mean the best, sometimes kids really misunderstand their parents. Those things happen to you when you were really quite innocent. You haven't done anything to yourself. If you have a persistently bad habit that you're very self-blaming, that seems so natural and so hard to change, chances are this is coming from something much further out of your control than you think it is. And it can be very helpful to remind yourself of your childhood. So, and this is actually a tip that I got from my wife. I don't know. I don't know. This is a little anecdotal maybe because this one hasn't been researched, but I've had a lot of clients try it and they find it very effective because when they're seeing themselves as a child on their phone, as often as they look at their phone, it reminds them, oh yeah, okay, I have to be nice to myself. Sometimes I've had clients tell me they're like in the middle of being mad at themselves. It's like, oh, I'm late for this thing now. I got to go here. I'm such an idiot. And then they see themselves as a kid on their phone background. They're like, right, I'm not an idiot. I'm actually a decent person who has fallen behind today. And then it's very effective. It's a way to build in it's really hard to catch ourselves. So this way you're looking at your phone however many times for basically nothing. Now you can look at it for something a little bit more productive. And I think I'm going to kind of start rounding out now to leave some time for Q&A. I hope I'm not moving too fast. We're going to talk just a little bit about, at the end there, about compassion. And I'm going to, talk about that marshmallow study thing that I mentioned. So if anyone has any questions about anything so far, about those almost nothing interventions, anything else about meditation, just throw it in the chat and I'll get to it for sure. Appreciate all the questions. If not, that's fine. We have some time at the end. But I do want to talk about compassion because if meditation is the silver bullet, I mean, compassion is like, this is the water bottle you need for the marathon that you're about to run. And that's one thing I think is becoming clear as we talk about the way that habit formation and brain changes work. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? This isn't going to be something that changes super fast. So compassion can be thought of as like a water bottle, something that keeps you going even when things are hard. And people often confuse, speaking of water bottles, people often confuse, or they feel like self-esteem is what they really want, and that self-compassion will just make them soft or sort of demotivate them, which is not true. That's actually just flatly untrue, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the problem with self-esteem, I don't mind self-esteem. I like it when people have high self-esteem, but there's a problem in terms of sustainability with self-esteem, because most of the time that we get self-esteem, especially I think as in North America, we get it from being above average in something. And you can see the problem that creates when the vast majority of people are average or below, right? In most things, everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses, right? So that creates a problem because we're also now surrounded more than ever with people who are above average. There's a big difference between the way that people look on a magazine cover versus the people in the magazine aisle, or on Instagram versus looking at Instagram, right? And that's because not only do they have the technology of cameras and professionals taking their pictures, and they become very skilled at taking pictures that make the most of their body and the angles and everything, right? Not only that, but to take, for example, an actor who has a total body transformation for a role, they have trainers and chefs and coaches and studios paying for things, and they don't have anything else that they need to be focused on comparably to ourselves. We don't have anyone taking care of a lot of those things for us day to day. So there's huge problems getting developed in society. And this is more data from Kristen Neff, by the way, about this sort of obvious problem created by, we want to have high self-esteem, but we generally only have self-esteem boosts when we're above average. What we're noticing is there's climbing rates of narcissism in society. If you're curious, that's measured in college students, because lots of things are, because you can pay college students like $10 for a survey and they'll do it. But and they're just a very available, studyable population. But we're seeing that climb up, more and more rates of narcissism. And that's a problem that I think develops when people need to see themselves as all powerful because they can't cope with something in their environment that's making them feel small, right? For just put it overly simply, I'm not putting it out there that's the only way to understand narcissism. Similar data that we're seeing in childhood, even earlier than university or college age, is that most children tend to regard themselves as fairly attractive, which I think is great. And they, up until about the third grade. And then after the third grade, they're now starting to have drops in how attractive they think that they are. This is disproportionately affecting young girls, which is not mysterious. Again, if you look at like the Instagrams and the magazine covers and billboards. And it used to last, like people would have a basically positive view of their appearance until, puberty showed up and started kind of changing what we look like. And then it's pretty hard. But this is now happening sooner and sooner and sooner. A third grader should really not be preoccupied with these sorts of things. And it's very sad to find that they are. So if the only way for these people to get out of this self-deprecating view, thinking again to what I talked about last time, your rate of success will be much higher if you try to change yourself in such a way that makes you healthier because you deserve to live and feel well, as opposed to trying to change yourself because you think you're awful and need to do better or be better in order to deserve, positive regard. Then you're going to have a much harder time adhering to any sort of plan, because it's just going to be very self-defeatist. So that's the macro, but also, even again, coming back to the brain, compassion creates positive change events, positive hormonal events in the brain and body. Self-critical thoughts create identical neurological and hormonal events as when we are in the presence of a physical threat. So if someone were to come into your home right now and be yelling at you and threatening your physical safety, you'd obviously be very scared. But that's very similar things going on in your brain as to when you're being cruel to yourself, right? Maybe the amounts are different, the intensities are different, but we're also thinking of ourselves much more frequently than someone is coming into our house to threaten our safety. So that too is not a great place to start from. If people are in a sustained state of high cortisol, fight or flight, then that's not a great place to begin to build long-term change or plans. So I'm going to probably be closing this up right away, the talking portion. I guess it would just be so difficult for me to overstate how strongly associated with mental well-being self-compassion is. And to bring in the marshmallow experiment just real quick, the follow-up that they did, because they wanted to know what was it that made the children able to not take the marshmallow. And they did that by repeating the study and then interviewing the children who did not wait, or who did wait, on what made you able to wait, or why weren't you able to wait. And does anyone know, or does anyone want to have a guess? I'm just gonna give you a minute, because it's pretty amazing. It was basically one singular thing that determined whether or not the child would eat the marshmallow or wait. And again, that was correlated with either, with doing much better in life in many respects for years after. The single variable that made the difference was how much the child trusted the interviewer. It had nothing to do with whether or not they were hungry, or whether or not, I don't even know what else a kid would think of. There's the videos are coming to my mind, but it was only to do with how much they trusted the interviewer. And we need to be able to have that kind of relationship with ourselves as adults, because as adults, no one's here to punish us. No one's here to pick us up when we fall down if we're not having a good time starting a good habit or a good routine. We have to do that for ourselves. And this kind of leads me to the last part about why I think it is that we notice in the brain and in the research that compassion is so powerful. And this is what I'm going to end on. And it's sort of what we're still learning so much. And I'm sure that's come across very clearly today and last time about the nature of the brain and the nervous system and how they work and what they need. But your body is built with certain expectations. This is a line of reasoning from someone named Gabor Mate. He's also a doctor. I'd encourage everyone to look into his work. I consider it prolific, but your body is built with certain expectations. Your lungs, for example, represent the expectation of oxygen. If you were born and your lungs got less oxygen than you were expecting throughout your whole childhood, that would physically change in an unfortunate way the strength of your body. The capabilities of your mind would be forever altered by whether or not you accessed the expected level of oxygen that you had when you were born, just by having lungs. And we're learning more and more about what expectations the brain and the nervous system are built into this world with. And what we are finding, the best way to put it, in my opinion, and it's coming through in research in the compassion and brain studies all the time, is that our brain and our nervous system are wired with the expectation of unconditional love. This is very, astounding, but it's also somewhat sad, because realistically, I don't think unconditional love really exists in this world. The best of parents, doing the best job they possibly can with all kinds of love for their children, are humans. They will falter, they will fall short, or if nothing else, the child will misunderstand them. And so that means we're going to have certain obstacles. No one is going to be perfect. No one is going to flawlessly accomplish or do every task or form a good habit right away. And the only way that we're going to, I think, slip into these patterns of long-term and sustainable change is if we can offer ourselves that unconditional love. And I think that's what compassion is. I think that allowing yourself to still be valuable when you have failed, and to coach yourself with pleasant language and acceptance while still expecting yourself to do better in the future is that's something that's very close to unconditional love. And the more that we have the ability to do that for ourselves, I think that the more that we will be able to achieve change and growth in our mind and in our bodies. And that's how I'm going to end this one. So I'd encourage everyone to delve deeply into the resources of meditation. Look up Kristen Neff. I'll put her name in the chat now. She's that expert on, Ned. There you go. Self-compassion. And that's where we're going to end it. So no problem. Thank you for coming. So we'll open up to the Q&A if anyone has any questions at all. If you have to run, you have to run. Thank you so much for coming.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, it's not really a question, it's a comment. It's just kind of hitting me how it fits into what you said about compassion here. I read a post this week, and it was about a person that was tried many things, guitar lessons, dance classes, sports, different things, tried all these things and didn't do well in a lot of them. But instead of looking at ourselves as failing in those things, you should look at it as you got to experience so many different things. And it just really meant a lot to me, because an example that I have sitting in my fridge right now is sourdough starter. I've been working on doing that almost a year now. And it's never really good bread. It's a lot of time. And I only stick with it because I want to succeed. But when I read that, I thought, no, I don't really want to stick with it. I tried it and it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I don't know, it just really fit into what you were saying now about compassion. It's a small relief to my brain to look at things in that way.
Yeah, you could almost think of that as like if you're, again, speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to a child or the way that you would speak to a friend. You might ask a kid or your friend, like, do you really like making sourdough bread? Like, do you enjoy that? Right? Like, is this something that you want to do all the time? Or, because then it's worthwhile for you to continue to engage in it. But if it's not, well, you had a great experience, you learned some stuff, and you can move on from it. You don't have to necessarily start associating that with how good of a week or day you're going to have. So I like that a lot. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
It can get you out of a thought loop, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura. No problem to wait a few minutes. Therapists are usually pretty comfortable with awkward silences. If anyone else has anything else to ask or add. I'll keep waiting, but I'm going to end the recording now because I think that that's probably fine. And anything really important, there's got to be something that you get for being in the group that other people don't get, right? All right. Thanks everyone for watching, who watches the recorded version, for being here.